Hello everyone and welcome to my channel Y&R Trends. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. It was a warm Los Angeles evening, the kind that usually gave Sharon a sense of peace after the emotional storms that had shaped much of her life. But this time peace was the last thing she felt. The lights of the city glimmered below her hotel balcony, but her mind was a whirlwind of anxiety. She had come to LA to visit Noah, to check in on him after months of worrying about his silence. Her son's texts had become shorter, his calls less frequent, his tone more distant. Something had been off, but Sharon couldn't quite place it, until now. Her instincts had always been sharp, and this time, they were screaming that something terrible had happened. As the night stretched on, she left a voicemail for Nick, her voice trembling. "Nick, I'm in LA. I can't find Noah anywhere. Please call me back." But that was the last anyone heard from Sharon. By the next morning, Nick Newman's phone was ringing non-stop. It was Mariah. Her voice panicked as she relayed the news that Sharon hadn't checked out of her hotel. The front desk reported that her bed hadn't been slept in, her belongings were still in the room, and her phone had been found lying on the nightstand, battery dead. Nick's stomach sank. His first thought was Noah. Where was his son? Why hadn't he returned any calls? He tried reaching out to Tessa, but she hadn't heard from either of them. The eerie silence only deepened the sense of dread. Within hours, Nick was on the first flight out to Los Angeles, determined to find his mother and uncover what was going on with his son. When Nick arrived in LA, he went straight to Sharon's hotel. Seeing her belongings scattered and untouched made his chest tighten. The police were already involved, but the detective assigned seemed uninterested, muttering about adults disappearing all the time in the city. Nick, however, knew better. Sharon had fought too hard to rebuild her life to simply vanish. He began retracing her last steps, checking her credit card records and surveillance footage. What he found made his blood run cold. Footage of Sharon leaving the hotel late at night, alone, walking down a side street toward an abandoned art studio once rented by Noah. That was 2 nights ago. No one had seen her since. Nick drove to the old studio, his heart pounding. The building was locked, its windows boarded up, but the padlock on the side door was broken. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint scent of turpentine. Canvases were scattered everywhere. Half-finished paintings, strange abstract shapes, and one that sent chills down his spine. It was a portrait of Sharon. She was painted in soft pastels, her expression serene but distant, surrounded by darkness creeping in from the edges. On the back of the canvas, written in smeared paint, were the words, "She shouldn't have come." Nick's breathing quickened as he stumbled back, realizing this wasn't just about Noah's disappearance. Something sinister was happening. He called out for his son, his voice echoing through the empty space. No answer. As he turned to leave, his phone buzzed. The number was unknown. Hesitant, he answered. The voice on the other end was low, distorted, almost mechanical. "Nick Newman," it said. "You're in LA looking for Sharon. If you want to see her alive again, you'll stop asking questions about Noah." For a moment Nick couldn't speak. His throat went dry, his hand trembling as he gripped the phone. "Who is this? Where is she?" he demanded. The voice gave a dark chuckle. "You're not in control this time, Nick. You've already lost one family member. Do you really want to lose another?" Then the line went dead. Nick stood frozen, the phone still pressed to his ear, the threat echoing in his mind. It wasn't random, this was personal. Someone had taken Sharon, and that someone knew exactly what they were doing. Back in Genoa City, word spread fast. Mariah and Faith were distraught, struggling to make sense of the situation. Victor tried to pull strings with his connections in law enforcement, while Nikki urged Nick to stay cautious. But Nick wasn't listening to anyone. He was consumed by anger and guilt, determined to find his mother even if it meant breaking every rule in the book. He started digging into Noah's life in LA, reaching out to people who had worked with him on his photography projects. Most had nothing to say, but one young assistant, clearly shaken, finally broke down. She told Nick that Noah had been involved with a dangerous art dealer named Carter Lang, a man known for exploiting young artists and rumored to be connected to the darker side of the LA underworld. Nick's next stop was Lang's gallery, A sleek building in downtown LA filled with expensive abstract art and silent, intimidating staff. When Nick demanded to see Lang, he was told the man was out of the country. But as he turned to leave, a shadowy figure stepped into the hallway, blocking his path. "You're Noah Newman's father," the man said with a smirk. "You should have stayed in Genoa City." Nick lunged forward, grabbing him by the collar, but the man only laughed. "You really don't get it, do you? Your son made a deal with the wrong people. Sharon came here to fix it. Now you have a choice: walk away or bury them both." Nick's blood boiled, but the man slipped away before he could react. The words hit like a hammer. Whatever Noah had been caught up in, Sharon had gone straight into danger trying to protect him. Back in his hotel room, Nick stared out at the LA skyline, torn between rage and despair. That night, he received another call from the unknown number. The same voice, colder this time, said, "Noah's death wasn't an accident. But if you want Sharon back, you'll stop digging into his killer." Nick froze. The room seemed to tilt around him. Noah's death? What was this person talking about? His son wasn't dead, at least he didn't think so. Nick's mind spun out of control as he replayed the words. If Noah was dead, where was the proof? And why would Sharon disappear right after learning the truth? He began piecing it together. Noah must have uncovered something dangerous, something that got him killed. Sharon found out, and whoever was responsible was now silencing her. The idea tore at Nick's heart. He refused to believe both his mother and son were gone. He had to fight back, but the killer had made it clear. Pushing further could cost Sharon her life. Days passed with no sign of Sharon. The police were no closer to finding her, and the case began to cool. But Nick refused to stop. He tracked down security footage from a nearby gas station that showed Sharon's car the night she disappeared. It was followed by a black SUV with tinted windows. Running the plates led him to a shell company, one linked to Carter Lang's gallery. That was the break he needed. He returned to the gallery at night, breaking in to search for answers. Deep in the basement he found a hidden storage room filled with canvases and photographs, many of them belonging to Noah. One photo caught his eye. A picture of Noah standing beside Lang, smiling with Sharon in the background. Someone had circled Sharon's face in red ink. Before Nick could process it, the lights flickered on, and a voice spoke from behind him. "You were warned, Nick." He turned slowly, his fists clenched, to see Lang standing there, calm and cold. "You killed my son," Nick growled. Lang smiled thinly. "Your son killed himself the moment he thought he could expose me." Sharon tried to bargain, but she was too late. Nick lunged, tackling Lang to the ground, fury consuming him. But before he could strike again, two men dragged him off. Lang adjusted his suit and said quietly, "Here's your ultimatum. Leave LA tonight, or I'll send you Sharon's body instead of her voice." That night, Nick sat alone in his car, shaking. He had recorded everything Lang said on his phone, but it wasn't enough to get Sharon back. He knew Lang was bluffing partially. Sharon had to be alive somewhere, hidden as leverage. Nick sent the recording to Victor, asking him to use his resources to dig deeper. Within hours, Victor called back with grim news. Lang had powerful friends and was already aware that Nick had been snooping. "You need to be careful," Victor warned. "He's not bluffing. He'll make good on that threat." But Nick couldn't walk away. The thought of Sharon, alone, terrified, possibly hurt, was unbearable. He returned to the abandoned studio one last time, hoping for a clue. There, hidden beneath a canvas, he found a small envelope addressed to him. Inside was a photo of Sharon, her face bruised but alive, sitting in a dimly lit room. On the back were the words, "You have 48 hours. Choose wisely." Nick's heart raced. The ultimatum was clear. Either he stopped pursuing Noah's killer, or Sharon would die. Torn between vengeance and love, Nick found himself in the darkest moment of his life. Every instinct told him to strike back, to expose Lang and avenge Noah. But Sharon's life hung in the balance. He could hear her voice in his mind, pleading with him to be careful, to think before acting. For once, Nick had to choose restraint over rage. He contacted Chance Chancellor, asking for help off the record. Together they devised a plan to fake Nick's retreat, making it appear that he had left LA for good while Chance's team tracked Lang's movements. As the deadline approached, Nick received one final call from the killer. "Your time is up," the voice said. But before the line disconnected, a faint sound came through. A bell tolling in the background. Nick recognized it immediately. It was from an old church near the coast, one that had been abandoned for years. He drove there in a frenzy, kicking open the door and calling out Sharon's name. His heart stopped when he heard a weak voice call back. Sharon was tied to a chair, bruised but alive. He rushed to her, cutting the ropes and holding her tightly. "I thought I lost you," he whispered. She clung to him, trembling. "Noah tried to protect me," she said through tears. "He found out what Lang was doing. And they killed him. I tried to get justice for him, but I walked right into their trap." Before they could escape, Lang appeared with a gun, his face twisted with rage. "You just don't listen, do you, Nick?" he snarled. But this time Nick was ready. Chance and his team burst through the doors, guns drawn. Lang was arrested, shouting threats as he was dragged away. Sharon collapsed into Nick's arms, sobbing with relief. The nightmare was finally over, or so they thought. Days later, back in Genoa City, Sharon tried to heal, but the loss of Noah haunted her. Nick stayed by her side, determined to keep her safe. Yet, in the quiet hours of the night, Nick's phone would buzz with unknown numbers. No voice, no message, just silence. Each time he wondered if it was truly over, or if someone else out there still wanted revenge. Sharon's disappearance had been the beginning of something far darker. A secret that stretched beyond Lang, into something neither of them could yet understand. And as the Newmans tried to move on, one thing became certain. The past never stays buried for long in Genoa City. Nick knew that the ultimatum had changed him forever. He had faced the unthinkable, lost his son, and nearly lost his mother too. But in the shadows of Los Angeles, a storm was still brewing. Someone else had been pulling the strings all along, and soon they would make their move. The tragedy of Noah and Sharon's ordeal wasn't an ending. It was just the beginning of a darker chapter waiting to unfold in The Young and the Restless. The oppressive Los Angeles heat seemed to press down on the city with a particular malevolence, a physical manifestation of the feverish anxiety that had gripped the Newman and Abbott families for days. Sharon Collins, a woman whose gentle spirit had been a calming presence in so many lives, was gone, vanished without a trace from the very heart of Genoa City, a place that had both cherished and tormented her. The initial confusion had quickly curdled into a cold, gripping dread, the kind that settles in the stomach and refuses to budge. Nick Newman, her ex-husband and a man bound to her by a history too complex for simple labels, was a portrait of frantic energy barely contained by a fraying sense of control. His office at Newman Enterprises, usually a command center for corporate warfare, had been transformed into a makeshift war room of a different sort. Maps of Los Angeles spread across his mahogany desk, her photograph, a smiling, carefree Sharon that felt like it belonged to another lifetime, staring back at him from his phone screen, a constant, agonizing reminder of what was at stake. He had pulled every string, called in every favor, leveraged the immense Newman wealth to turn the city upside down, but Ella, in its vast, indifferent sprawl, had swallowed her whole, leaving behind only a chilling silence and the echo of his own escalating fears. Meanwhile, in the shadows of the city, a different kind of tension was coiling, a secret so dark it threatened to poison every life it touched. Adam Newman, Nick's perpetually troubled brother, moved through his days with the haunted look of a man living on borrowed time. The secret of Ashlyn Locke's death was a cancer growing inside him, fed by the complicit silence of his wife, Sally Spectra, and the ever-watchful, dangerously unstable Victor Newman. They had disposed of the body, crafted a narrative of a sudden tragic illness, and presented a united, if brittle front to the world. But the foundation of that lie was cracking under the weight of its own construction. Victor's methods were clean, clinical, and utterly ruthless, but Adam's conscience, a faculty he often pretended was non-existent, was screaming. Every time he looked at his father, he saw not a partner in crime, but a puppeteer ensuring his strings were pulled tight, and the fear of exposure was a constant, cold knot in his chest, a feeling far more familiar and damning than any corporate failure. The fragile facade they had so carefully constructed began to splinter on an otherwise ordinary afternoon. Nick, driven by a desperate hunch, had been scouring the less savory corners of the digital world, following whispers and the shadowy trails that private investigators sometimes miss. His pursuit led him to a dead-end alley downtown. A meeting with a low-level informant who promised a lead on Sharon's whereabouts for a price. It was a trap, but not the kind he was expecting. As he stood there, the acrid smell of garbage and urine filling the air, a figure emerged from the deepening gloom, not the skittish informant, but a man whose presence was both a surprise and a horrifying confirmation of his worst suspicions. It was the man responsible for Ashland Locke's death. He wasn't a faceless monster from a criminal underworld. He was someone connected, someone who knew the intricate web of their lives, a ghost from their own privileged circles made flesh and menace. His voice was calm, almost conversational, but his eyes held a flat, deadly promise. He confirmed he had Sharon. He described the scarf she was wearing, the one Nick had bought for her on a trip to Paris a lifetime ago, in such intimate detail that there could be no doubt. The ultimatum was delivered not with a snarl, but with a chilling matter-of-fact precision that was more terrifying than any shouted threat. The killer laid out his terms with the cool detachment of a businessman closing a deal. Nick was to return to Genoa City, and use every ounce of his influence to permanently bury the investigation into Ashland Locke's disappearance. The official story of a fatal heart attack was to become unassailable truth. There were to be no more questions, no lingering doubts from Victoria, no nosy reporters, no quiet inquiries from Jack Abbott. Nick was to become the chief architect and enforcer of the lie, leveraging his name, his relationships, and his power to seal the tomb on the truth. The price for Sharon's life was the sanctity of his own soul, and the betrayal of everyone who trusted him. Failure was not an option. The killer made it clear that he was watching, that he had eyes everywhere, and that any deviation from the plan, any hint to the police, any whispered conversation with Victor or Adam, would result in Sharon's immediate execution. The message was seared into Nick's brain. Her blood would be on his hands, a final damning consequence of his failure to play his part in their macabre theater. The drive back to Genoa City was the longest of Nick Newman's life. The vibrant, chaotic energy of LA faded in his rearview mirror, replaced by the familiar skyline of his hometown, which now felt like a gilded cage. The ultimatum echoed in his mind, a relentless drumbeat of impossible choices. He was walking into a den of lions, tasked with convincing the most perceptive and powerful people he knew, his own family, of a lie they were already predisposed to believe, all while knowing that a single misstep, a single flicker of doubt in his eyes, would sign Sharon's death warrant. He found Victor in the study at the ranch, the patriarch exuding an aura of calm control that now seemed monstrously deceptive. The lead was a dead end. Nick heard himself say, the words ash in his mouth. Just another junkie looking for a quick payday. He advocated for closing the book, for accepting the tragic, natural narrative of Ashland's death for Victoria's sake, for the family's stability. Victor's gaze was inscrutable, a granite mask that gave nothing away, but Nick felt a terrifying certainty that his father saw straight through him, that this was all a test, and that he was failing in ways he couldn't even comprehend. The true crucible of his new role as a liar, however, was his confrontation with Adam. Finding his brother in the dim light of the society, nursing a drink that seemed to offer no solace, Nick launched into his performance, his anger a convenient mask for his terror. He accused Adam of knowing more than he was letting on, of his usual shady dealings potentially being tied to Ashland's death, a deliberate misdirection that hit too close to the actual truth. He demanded Adam drop his own quiet investigations, to let the past stay buried. But Adam, perpetually coiled and defensive, reacted not with guilt, but with a strange probing intensity. He saw something in Nick's eyes that others missed. Not just anger, but a raw animal fear. "This isn't about Ashland, is it, Nick?" Adam had asked, his voice low and dangerously perceptive. "You're scared. What aren't you telling me?" In that moment, the gulf between them, usually filled with rivalry and resentment, became a chasm of unspoken truths and shared peril. Nick realized he was not just fighting an external enemy. He was now trapped in a labyrinth where his own brother's intuition could prove as deadly as the killer's threat. While Nick navigated the treacherous waters of his home, Sharon was facing her own private hell. Her captivity was not in a dank, dark dungeon, but in a sterile, anonymous apartment, a place devoid of personality, the windows sealed and covered. Her captor was a study in chilling contradiction. He could be polite, almost courteous, bringing her food and water, ensuring her basic comfort. But these moments of eerie normalcy were punctuated by sudden, terrifying shifts in mood. He would speak of Ashland Locke with a twisted sense of justification, painting himself as a wronged party seeking a perverse form of restitution, his eyes glazing over with a fanatical light that made Sharon's blood run cold. He made it clear that her fate was entirely contingent on Nick's obedience. Every minute of her imprisonment was a lesson in psychological torture, the slow tick of a clock counting down to an execution she couldn't predict. She used every tool she had, every ounce of empathy and perception that had defined her, to try and find a crack in his armor, a sliver of humanity to appeal to, but he was a fortress of single-minded purpose, and her attempts seemed only to amuse him, reinforcing her utter powerlessness. Back in Genoa City, the pressure on Nick was reaching a breaking point. Victoria, Ashland's grieving widow, began asking new questions, her grief sharpening into a suspicious edge. Jack Abbott, ever the loyal friend to Sharon, was mobilizing his own resources, unaware that his efforts were inadvertently putting her in greater danger. Nick found himself in the impossible position of having to sabotage his own allies, to pour cold water on their determination, all while the image of Sharon, alone and terrified, haunted his every waking moment. He started to become reckless, making cryptic calls from burner phones, his behavior growing more erratic and secretive. It was during a clandestine meeting in a deserted parking garage, as he was desperately trying to get an update from a source he hoped the killer didn't know about, that the consequences of his disobedience were made terrifyingly clear. His phone buzzed, an unknown number. He answered to hear a voice, cold and flat, that described the exact make and model of the car he was sitting in, the color of his jacket, the time on his watch. "The next time you stray from the path, Mr. Newman," the voice said, "the message will be delivered in a box. Do you understand?" The line went dead and Nick was left sitting in the silent, cold garage, the walls of his prison closing in, the surveillance so complete, he felt he could no longer trust the air he breathed. The realization that he was utterly alone in this fight, that any attempt to seek help would be instantly known and fatally punished, crushed the last vestiges of his hope. He was isolated in a crowd, a puppet on a string, and the master was a ghost who saw everything. He began to understand that this was not just about Ashland Locke. This was a systematic dismantling of his will, a demonstration of power designed to break him completely. His only path forward was to embrace the lie with a conviction he did not feel, to become the most vocal proponent of the cover story, to look Victor in the eye and affirm the fiction, to stand by as Victoria's doubts were systematically dismantled by the very family she trusted.